What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the Vanguard Project podcast. My name is Austin Jardine, and this is episode 99. And you would think that after 99 episodes, 99 interviews, that I would be better at recording an intro and an outro, and yet here I am. I think this is my third or fourth attempt at getting this right. So we're going to see how this one goes, but thank you for tuning in. If you haven't, please take a quick second to subscribe, rate, review, like, comment, all of the good things wherever you're listening. It means the world to me. For those of you joining for the first time, my goal here is growth through story, strength through community. So as we start to roll some of these interviews, or as we roll these interviews, you're going to find that I don't really talk a whole lot about myself. I've recorded a couple episodes here and there, interjected some of my personal experiences, but really my goal here is to have the interviewee share their life story in a way that relates to you, in a way that gets you excited, hopefully find some motivation, a new way of thinking, maybe a different path to kind of continue marching forward with, or maybe finding a community to join in on. And really my goal is really to help tap into some of these folks' life experiences to hopefully get you excited about something. You know, I've met a lot of people doing things that I didn't know were either career paths or interests or hobbies that, you know, has really kind of lent my view of the world to grow and expand significantly over the past year. So please, like I said, like, rate, subscribe to the show. Also, if you're big on the Instagrams, please follow me on the Instagrams. It's just the Vanguard Project with periods in between. I'll make sure that's linked in the episode description. And also, I have merch. So if you need new shirts or sweatshirts or just like what's going on, please hit up vanguardstories.com. Follow the links, get some merch, and, tag me. I want to see what the heck's going on. See what crazy kind of shenanigans you're getting into because, backpacking season is still there, still going on. So if you're heading out or if you're fishing, I recently picked up fly fishing. Shout out to my buddy Creighton over at Scout Arms because holy crap, I'm addicted. But then also hunting season's coming up really, really quick. So be sure to grab some stuff. Tag me in it. I'd love to see what y'all are up to and continue growing this show and this podcast and hopefully the community. But getting into today's episode, I am so thankful to have sat down with Mr. Rob Gutierrez. He is an amazing dude, and I don't want to take away any of what he has to say by, rambling on too much because he's a very insightful human being. He's lived a crazy life and just has a lot of very good words as far as growth mindset and continuing to push forward even when things are honestly, when it seems like there's nothing left. And so I'm really thankful to have met Mr. Rob and really thankful that he took some time with me to sit down and kind of give his story and insight. So without further ado, today's episode is brought to you by Eberlestock. And Eberlestock is based out of Boise, which is real close to my hometown. And I'm very thankful for these guys because they've helped me get connected to a lot of these folks, including Mr. Rob today. And I use a lot of their gear. They're a big hunting military EDC manufacturer in terms of packs and technical gear. And so this past weekend, I actually went out fishing. I was out fly fishing, and it was like 96 degrees, which for me is really, really hot. I don't know if I'm a wuss. I don't know how many of y'all are down in Arizona, but 96 is hot. And I was out fishing 93. I don't know. It was hot regardless. I was out fishing, fly fishing, and I didn't want to get fried, and I didn't want to get bit by all the freaking bugs. And so I was out in my Bruno hoodie. And so for those of you that don't know, the Bruno hoodie is their lightweight four-way stretch hoodie that they've got in a couple different camo patterns and everything. They've got little thumb holes to keep slide your fingers through, so keep the hand or the sun off the back of your hands. And this thing was the bee's knees. I mean, I was out there, I had my hood up, I was out there with it, kind of zipped up over my hat underneath my waders, and I was just fishing. And honestly, I was about as happy as I could be just catching. I couldn't catch, there was some fat little bass out there that those little bastards wanted nothing to do with me, but I still caught a couple, 10 to 12 inch fish and just had a wonderful time. But without digressing too far down that rabbit hole, the Bruno hoodie was phenomenal because I sweat a whole heck of a lot, but it felt like it kind of kept it off my body for the most part, wicked everything away. It was light enough to keep the sun off, but not add extra like a layer of thermal, like it wasn't like hot for me. But give Tucker a call at the retail store. I will link their phone number in the episode description. Let them know that the Vanguard podcast sent you. Get hooked up, and then also be sure and check out some of the new gear that they dropped for this hunting season, including the puffies. I was playing with them this past weekend in the retail store, and your boy's going to go get some. So be sure to give them a call. Let them know the Vanguard podcast sent you. But I'm going to stop talking, and we're going to roll an awesome episode with Mr. Rob Gutierrez. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the Vanguard Project. My name is Austin Jardine, and I'm really excited for today's episode because I'm sitting down now with Mr. Rob Gutierrez, and he and I bumped shoulders a couple of weeks ago at the Eberlestock event. And I'm really excited because I was fortunate enough to hear your story, and I think a little bit more detail than you've given in some cases. At least that's kind of what it sounded like. And I'm really honored, man, that you reached out and were willing to sit down and chat with me. So if you don't mind, maybe introducing yourself a little bit, and we'll start chatting, and I'll ask questions and interrupt you, and maybe get to know you and your story and kind of what got you through a little bit better.
Yeah, man. Super appreciate to be on this and get an opportunity to talk to you again. Rob Gutierrez. Right now, I'm still an active duty Air Force member. Chief Master Sergeant. I'm the Major Command Functional Manager for all of combat control, and essentially responsible for the manpower and production and oversight on a lot of the training pipelines to make combat controllers in the Air Force here in Texas. And it's been a good just about hit 20 years real soon, and I mean it's been a good ride. So I'm just here to hang out and chit chat with you.
20 years. That's a long time, man.
It is. And it goes by really fast.
Yeah, I believe it. So I know, and this might be kind of duplicative for kind of our conversation, not necessarily for the recording, but do you mind talking about why the Air Force, how you got into it, what led you down, military service?
So, man, I grew up in National City, California. I usually say San Diego because nobody knows about National City because this is such a small little city on the coast right there. And in Southern California, I mean, I grew up in a regular household, mom, dad, siblings, brothers and sisters, went to school, played sports. At an early age, I got into martial arts and stuff like that, and kind of got a knack for sometimes throwing fists and stuff like that. But I grew up in a household where hard work was it. I had a really good example. My dad hustled his tail off for everybody. My mom was super awesome as can be. I'm a huge mama's boy, so kind of grew up that way with my brothers and sisters. Kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Originally, I wanted to be a car painter, an actual painter like my dad, and graduated high school, and throughout that time he was teaching me the trade and things like that, and kind of figured out that I was like, okay, well, this isn't the only thing in life. Let me go try something else. And I was pretty active and athletic in most cases. So I just went out and got another job as a meter reader for San Diego Gas and Electric, the electric company down there. And it seemed pretty cool because, man, really, I just read meters all day, gas and electric meters, from house to house all day, block to block, street to street. Sometimes getting chased by dogs, people angry about their bills. And would always be like, hey, man, I don't make the prices. I just read the meters. You know what I mean? And was trying to understand a whole bunch of things. And then I'm just like every other American that thought this on September 11th. I woke up from my shift and it was, super early, and I was the only small TV I had in my apartment, and I just kind of saw what was going on, and I was just super upset. And at that point, I was like, you know what? In my head, I was just I'm pretty sure, I don't know, what constitutes really war, but I'm pretty sure I had a feeling like this was it. And at the time too, I had no real direction. I was trying to figure everything else out in life, and like, just scraping by, man. And going, okay, well, like, I put all those thoughts aside and was like, this is what I want to go do. So I basically just called in and said, hey, I'm gonna go join the service. You guys to see what's going on TV. And they're just like, yeah, you still got to come to work, man. I was just like, no, really, I'm not coming into work. I'm literally gonna go join. And they're like, you can't do that. Like, and I was like, 100% I can. I can totally do whatever I want. Like, I quit. So they're like, you're gonna quit. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go to a recruiter's office. And in my head, I'm thinking, man, they're gonna ship me out like in no time, So basically just like quit my job right then and there. And then I drove over to this recruiting station in my city, and like everything was shut down. Like nobody was open. And so I pulled up thinking, man, this is it. I'm gonna talk to all these recruiters probably. I'm gonna join one, and just this different like thought process how I was gonna go, and they were like closed. So I was like, oh man, I quit my job, and nobody's here. So I got out of my pickup truck, and I kind of looked over, and I saw this dude like bebopping in, and he had a backpack in hand, but he started walking to the Air Force One office, and I was like, hey man, I was like, you guys hiring? He's like, we're always hiring. I was like, sweet, dude, I just quit my job, man. And I need a job. And he's like, I got plenty of jobs. And I was like, cool, man. So I was talking to him at the door, and he was opening it up, and he's like, give me a second. He's like, what do you want to do? I was like, man, I want to go fight. I was like, I just saw what's happened on TV. I want to go fight. And he's, as the Air Force, he's like, well, I mean, we fight, but it is the Air Force. So there's a lot of other jobs. And I was just like, yeah, man, no, I literally want to go fight, and nobody else is like open. So what do you got? He goes, so he walks me in, see these pamphlets, and he goes, man, I got 2 jobs that fight. He goes, these guys here, they rescue people, and they're like medics, and they do all kinds of like they rescue down pilots and stuff like that. They're called pararescue. They're called PJs. He's like, and then we have these other guys here, and they land aircraft like in just anywhere, like, airfields. He goes, like, just desert areas, the water. And I was just like, I go, but do they fight? And he goes, oh yeah. He's like, and back then combat control wasn't like a super known piece. So, and it still isn't really. And he goes, I'm pretty sure they drop bombs too. And I'm like, so I don't have to like rescue nobody? He's like, no, they just go like drop bombs and land aircraft. I'm like, deal, I'm in. He goes, this one? I'm like, yeah. He's like, hey man, he goes, I'll be honest with you. He goes, he's like, I've been here for a couple of years, and I've never seen anybody make it. And I was like, okay, like, sure, let's try. He goes, you got to take this PT test. And I was like, a PT test? Yeah. He's like, like a physical exercise test. I'm like, sure. Okay. So I'm pretty fit, because like when you're a meter reader, you're doing like 6-7 miles a day sometimes. It ranges, and it's either hills, and you're running from like house to house, and it just keeps you in shape. And I used to go to the gym like anybody else, because I'm at this point, I'm like 21 years old. I stayed fit, and I used to go riding, down in Scripps and La Jolla or Imperial Beach and stuff like that. And so I could swim. So he's like, yeah, man, schedule him for this test. Took it like 3 days later. Man, I did all the calisthenics. The run was easy, because I just ran all the time anyways. And then I failed to swim. And he's like, dude, you can't take it again until you learn how to swim better. And I was exhausted. I was like, dude, okay. But at that point, I had no job, a truck, and a lot of pride. So I went back home, and I was like, hey, man, I didn't make it for this one piece, so I got to train, and they're going to let me come back like in a couple of months and try again. So I was like scraping by, went back to an old job, like a in-between job that I had at a restaurant, and just basically kind of almost like lived in my truck and near the municipal pool, like begging for them to teach me how to swim. So I was like cleaning bathrooms, like doing anything I could just so they would teach me. And then they basically taught me how to swim and got my time down, and then went back and took it, skedaddled. was gone, man. So that's essentially like my entrance to the service. It was really based on because, man, I was really PO'd. I was pretty pissed off, and I
Yeah.
wanted to go fight.
So a couple questions coming out of that then. So it's interesting because it kind of sounded like you could have followed your dad's footsteps more or less, right? And gone into painting, family trade, whatever the case may be. What was it like for you to step out of that and kind of more or less break the mold to go do what you wanted to do?
Man, when I look back at it now, um, the whole risk versus reward, right? And at the time, it was tough because no one in my family had ever left. Like I was the first one like taken off, really, to go away. And secondly, with the intention knowing like, man, and I don't know what it was, but like I said, when I grew up, I took martial arts, right? And it was a very disciplined type of Taekwondo school where everything was kind of ran like the military. So I just had that like feeling to go do something. And it was more of the, um, I guess you would say like, I want to go do something better than what I have. And I knew I could probably, because I'll be honest, my dad was and is probably the best car painter I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of cars over my life, and still to this day, I'm like, nah, my dad's way better. And it was something that I could have went into. And he kind of was like, we talked about it, and he was just like, you got to go do what you got to do, man. And he told me, he's like, you're a grown man. You make your decisions. Whatever you do, you stick with it. Finish it out. And they honestly, growing up, they never let me quit anything. Because there were some sports I did, and I'm like, this sport sucks. And he was like, you're going to finish the season. You going to, A, because they're like, we paid for it. You're going to finish it. But B, like, he's like, we don't quit. Just, you don't quit. I'm like, okay. So it was the whole like, and then at that time, like I had more of like a moral problem, I guess you would say, to solve. Was, do I leave and maybe upset them and my family and then leave home and they're always going to worry, or do I go chase something that, you know, who knows, man, you could die. And I don't know, man. I just had a call and I felt like it's time to go. So I just made a decision and stuck with it and decided to leave, even though, it probably could hurt their feelings and stuff like that. But I mean, they're my family. They were going to love me regardless. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's a pretty hard dynamic, right? I feel like a lot of people face that where they might want to go do something but don't want to hurt feelings. So in maybe the same vein of that, what and I don't know how I want to ask this, but like what pushed you over the edge to say, hey, I'm gonna face this moral problem? And it's almost not selfishly, but still kind of selfishly, and say, hey, I want to go do this for myself. How did you convince yourself to go?
Um, I guess you would say at that point in my life, I felt that, like I said, I had no direction. And I felt that if I went and did something that would A, make me happy, B, challenge me, and then C, which was really one of the most important things to myself, was to make my family and my parents and my sister and my brothers like super proud of me, then I think it's worth it. Because, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, like we see candidates and I always ask them, like, what is your why? Like, why are you here? And I ask them and they tell me their why. And that was my why, was to figure out like, go do something and make them proud. Because at the end of the day, they're still going to be, I could have been the best like gardener or like mechanic or whatever the case, it still would have been proud, right, of me because they're my parents, but I wanted to excel at something and I wanted to be challenged. And I thought this was the way, like this was the right way to go. So I took it.
Okay. No, I like that. I've heard What Is Your Why? Is it Simon Sinek?
Yeah.
I think he's got the book. Yep. Okay. So then going the Air Force route was almost by virtue of just them being open, right? Combat controller was kind of the mystique, understanding that there was going to be the combat route, right? What about fighting or going into war and having a combat role was most appealing?
I would say the most appealing thing, especially throughout the pipeline, was understanding the impact that that this profession and that this career field in the Air Force would have. I didn't really truly realize it until way later how important it would be. But throughout the pipeline, you have instructors and things like that, and obviously they would push you and like just grind you out until they would just literally try to grind you out to submission. And I think it was the fact that like I was just like me and a bunch of these were just either too stupid to quit or just didn't care. And I had that reasoning too. Like I could never face my family or as an older brother to my younger siblings, like tell them, man, I quit. Like, yeah, I gave up. Like I just didn't have it in me. It wasn't something that I could go back. I would feel very just like I let them down. So there was no point. There was like once, and like we say it within my profession, and other ones would say the term like burn the boats, man. Like burn them, because once you hit ground, and it's more based off like Viking and culture. They get to a place, they burn the boats. There's no other direction than forward. That's it. There's no turning around. You So it was like I'm already in it. I'm moving forward. I started learning, understanding, and listening to the instructors, and they would tell us like what was going on, to a certain degree of unclassified stuff. And they talk about like how this combat controller was doing this and this one was doing that, and how effective they were. And basically, where I first heard the term force multiplier, and how they'd say, hey, just one guy would change the battlefield with a radio. Just one guy, stronger than any weapon system out there. Just one guy with a radio talking to jets and bombers would change the landscape of of the fight. And it was super motivating to hear that. It was super motivating to read, because then they make you read about stuff, and I would read about individuals, and then there was just stories coming out, and hearing about these guys that were going in with these SF teams into Afghanistan and how impactful they were, you know what I mean? And then later on meeting them and understanding how awesome it was, and then listening to their recollection and their story, how they did it, and it was just even more motivating. So
Yeah. Okay. So I don't come from a military or law enforcement background. So I kind of ask a lot of these questions from really just understanding and wanting to know kind of how you made it through some of these things. But from the perspective of impact, as your time or in your time as a combat controller, what is the greatest impact that you feel that you were able to go make, most proud of, things that you've learned that you're like, holy shit, I never thought that I would have gone through X, Y, or Z thing?
man, there's a couple of those in a couple of different instances, man. Um, so first impact was like getting through the pipeline, right? And then going to a team, and then understanding through that team, like the real life, like the real profession, the real life that comes along with being an operator. Cause it's a lifestyle too. It's not just like you go to your average 9 to 5 job, it's a profession. You live, eat, breathe, like being an operator, being a combat controller, like understanding technology, radios, learning to communicate more effectively, using certain terminology and things like that. And then, my first deployment was like super impactful because, um, you know, you, and I don't know if everyone thinks this way, but like you train all that time, and at the time it took like almost 2 years to become a combat controller full up, plus another year of like additional skills training, and then getting your JTAC qualification to basically to call airstrikes and things like that, and being a full up combat controller, land aircraft on austere airfields and do surveys and stuff like that. And my actual first, like, you train for all these moments, right? And you train over and over and over, iterations, night iterations, day iterations, like stair step those iterations to get to a certain level so you feel comfortable with it. So when they send you out by yourself and you get attached to this team, and for like myself with an ODA out there, and we're in Eastern Afghanistan, and you're nervous and all these things, and then, man, first time it kicks off, like it just like snaps, like everything comes into play. And in a training setting, whatever, you're in your home base or whatever the case, like there you can say, oh man, I messed this up, and turn around and redo it again. But you don't get any redos out there in combat, man. So everything is just like the lights turn on, everything's focused, and everyone's looking at you to do some stuff. And we had an instance where, man, we took a significant, to us and the team I was with, a significant casualty, in which one of our teammates was killed in action. And then it was just, everything had changed from, we're still going to complete the mission, but the focus is to recover our teammate. And man, the impact of like understanding with when you're with your teammates, because you build a different bond with certain individuals and certain teammates when you go to war, that is it's like irreplaceable. You become closer than anything else because you're all you have to rely on. There's no one else to come get you. There's no one else going to come save you. And you literally have each other, and you got to be a team player. And I remember for that instance, because that was the first time a teammate of mine had been killed in action. And I could see him like laying in this open area where we got caught in a V-size ambush. And the acts that he did before that to let us know, and all the things about being a teammate and working as a team, and putting the team before yourself. And for him, he lost his life, sacrificing himself for us. And, how difficult it was basically to, like, for me to understand, like, at this point, I already knew, like, it was hot, like we were hot, we're in it. But when you lose a teammate, how much more it impacts you, because it can do two things. Like, you can end up doing, like, which happened to me initially, was you become oriented more to like a soda straw, where you're looking at everything from like a very close point of view, like this. And all I could focus on is him and protecting his body, and literally just pounding the enemy as much as I can. And for a teammate to come and say, hey man, like, I need you to take a step back. And my buddy's name is Nick. And he was like, I need you to think real quick. And man, that's not going to help us right now. We need to be more strategic when we fight these guys to go get Robbie. And I was so angry at the point, and I'm a lot younger at this time. So I was just like, nah, man, trying to gather my thoughts and understand it, and talk to him. And I told him, I was like, I'm going to vaporize this whole valley. Like, it's all going to be on fire. And he's like, that's not going to help us right now. We need to focus on clearing a path, taking out those targets, look beyond that, look at the high, and their experience too. So they were super helpful. And then to sit back and go, you're right. Like, okay. And the impact of like never leaving a teammate behind ever, because we got to bring them home. Those other bad guys, like, we'll see them again. They'll just hide and we'll see them again. But if we let them take Robbie, we'll never see him again. And it was Robert James Miller, who was actually posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. So the focus was to get him And the amount of hurt it that happened to me when I lost a teammate, because he was my gunner in my truck. So we had built a relationship. Um, but to lose him, but to go get him and recover him and then, you know, get him on the medevac and get him home was like a huge impact to me that mattered more than anything. Like I really didn't even care if I got shot or whatever the case, like didn't care. It only mattered about getting him home. And then also getting the other guys that were wounded home. So that was like the first one. And then, or type of like impact. And it seems real minuscule because it's just one person, right? But at the end of the day, it's not that it's just one person. It's just that one person's an American and he's a teammate, and it's everything. Like everything matters in that instance. Everything you do only matters to get him home because he's got a mom and dad, he had sisters and brothers that, you know, want their son home. So that was like a substantial impact that really just, you know, changed my life, I guess you would say. Um, the second one was later on, maturing and learning some things and um, uh, like for a little bit becoming an instructor and seeing some of the guys that I put through and like trying to teach them like the knowledge that I had so they could understand. Because I remember being at that point and the instructors told me stuff, but I just didn't get it. I really didn't understand it that well. And actually teaching them and trying to formulate my words so they can truly understand what's about to happen, um, how it's going to happen, and what's the best way to solve the problem. Um, and then kind of like consistently teaching them through like certain actions, like, hey, man, always tell them like the harder you train, the better chance of survival. So you better train to the hardest that you can because you don't get another opportunity once you're in the fight. And then seeing those guys progress and where I'm at now, especially now, seeing some of them. I mean, one of my troops, I mean, he received the Air Force Cross. His name is Alexi. Man, I couldn't have been prouder for a troop, in my life. I've seen some other guys that I've seen, and because they're operational still, I'm not going to say their names, but watching them progress to where they're at and seeing them mature and reading like sit reps of them when they were down range and doing stuff and going, man, like that is, I helped build that. Like I helped make that. And look what they're doing for their country. Super awesome. And the only way you can explain it, I guess, is like when you have kids and you teach them how to ride a bike and then they finally ride the bike on their own and you're like super happy about it. Yeah, you know what I mean? Or, with my daughter, watching her in her first jiu-jitsu match and watching her just destroy another kid and just like, you can't replace that, that feeling of fulfillment. It's just really hard. So, just seeing that stuff go along and understand that it impacted something, especially for those operators, like it impacted whatever I taught him. It was enough for him to get it so he can go and save people's lives and take the fight to the enemy and kill them.
So being a part of the progression of people that are doing amazing things is what I heard as being the next impactful thing. So kind of going back a little bit, one question that I have, and I didn't want to interrupt, and this might get personal, but for as someone that has lost teammates or people that are close, how did you get through that? And I ask so that if other folks are going through times where they have lost somebody too, or might even just be worried about somebody, how did you kind of navigate the emotional stress? And even in that situation, right? I can't even imagine the heightened level of attention, stress, anxiety, like all of the crazy shit going on. How did you kind of navigate that to maintain your own level of coolness? If that question makes sense.
Yeah. So in the fight, it's one thing because I guess you would say like during the action, um, understand that if you freak out, you're only going to make it worse. And you got a job to do. And the way I look at it sometimes too is that like, because he's not the only teammate that I lost, you know what I mean? But understanding that your teammates, and this goes for like any veteran out there that's, I guess you would say, that has, grief or loss, or they saw something happen, or, they probably have a little bit of like survivor's guilt and stuff like that, that impacts them, and they sit on it, and it just eats them alive, is the fact that, at the end of the day, the reality is what I believe is that my teammates would have wanted me to press on, since they're cut from the same cloth, that they wouldn't just stop and quit. They just wouldn't just give up. They wouldn't expect you to. Just like you wouldn't expect, if something happened to you, like you expect your teammates to continue. There's always a time to grieve and understand that. But at the same time, they're never going to want you just to stop what you're doing and just feel for them. They're going to want you to go press and make their sacrifice worth it. Because, and when I say make it worth it, like, man, live your life. Because life's a journey. And we talked about this before. Life's a journey, and it's a journey of experiences. And they would just want you to continue doing your thing, because they know that that's what made you happy. Just like it was reversed, you'd want them to be happy. And that their sacrifice was worth it. And that's what I could, like, when I think about all my buddies that we lost, they would just never, it would actually make them really mad if I just quit. They'd be super pissed off at me. They'll be like, don't be a quitter. Like, because they wouldn't. And the continuation of living your life and keeping their lives alive by saying their names, tell the stories, the good ones, the funny ones, do it. It gets it out, and it keeps them alive. And we always say this: you keep your friends that you lost alive by constantly, you always remember them, and you always talk about them. That way, they never die. They truly never die. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, in American history, do you ever think that we'll stop saying the word or the name of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah.
Well, they'll always be alive, right? Because we always got history behind them and the things they did for our country. Same thing. Your friends, they always stay alive. Just keep saying their name. Say the stories. Have the emotion.
That concept. Yeah.
Have the emotion. That emotion means that you care. Whether it's tears, smiles, laughing, making fun of them, how they would make fun of you, or whatever the case. Like, it keeps them alive, man. And you're doing the part. So that's really what kind of got me through, like, a lot of the stuff, and especially some of the close ones that I knew that we lost.
Keeping them alive.
You just got to keep them alive, man.
I like that. I'm going to remember that. Okay. So then, kind of moving forward and seeing the progression of people being part of their growth, keeping people alive, both, metaphorically and really keeping people alive, right? I mean, did you always want to go down the instructor path? What led you down the route of becoming the functional manager of combat controllers?
Oh, well, it's just in the training and education command. There's a couple of guys I still report to, but really that path was my path was a little bit different because a on the operational world going and doing my deployments and stuff like that, and then getting severely injured, and then in the meantime to kind of keep me going and get me back on track and stuff, they made me an instructor because of the facilities that were close in Florida that could help me to getting me back on status and stuff like that. And then from then on, then deploying again after that, after I was healed up and going back. And then one of the main reasons I came to the command I'm in now is because after you get to a certain point where you got to kind of make a decision. And this is just my experience. Everyone's experience is different in the service too, on the teams. Man, I had this wonderful boy, and we kind of figured out that he was on the autism spectrum, and I had this opportunity to continue being on a team and deploying and doing this stuff, or, make the decision and say, what do I value more? Because where I was living in New Mexico, they just didn't have the services for him. And we wouldn't have got the same type of care there that we could at some other places, but everything's at a cost, right? If you want something, it's going to come at a cost, some sort of cost. Nothing's free, right? Nobody rides for free. So for me, it was like, okay, well, do I give up my continuous dream, like my goal of being an operator and going to these different units and continuously deploying? Or at that point, do I put and say, you know what? I got to put my son first and get him the care he needs, hoping at one point maybe I'll deploy again. But you got to take the job that comes with it, which was no longer being an instructor, but being more of what's called a group, which is an echelon from the squadrons. Then you have a group, then your group, you have a wing. And depending on the wings, you go to numbered Air Force and the major command. And that was the path that I took because I just valued, I had to give up my own personal wanting of wanting to be on a team and wanting to go deploy and do this stuff, and then basically hand them off to my wife and go, hey, just take care of them. I'll be back. I'll be back in 8 months. I'll be back in 6 months. And then, kind of leave her on her own to handle it. And I was just like, I couldn't deal with doing that because he's my son. So I chose the route that I chose, which was to go to a group, stand up a training group, help stand up a training group, and then from there progress into like senior NCO ranks, and then get to the position I'm at because, taking care of my son, which in fact made huge progress. I mean, because we have the care here in Texas for him, I'm thankful that I made that decision, that I thought it through and made the right decision. Because sometimes in those decisions, man, our egos are too, our egos and pride are willing to overstep and control what's necessary and force us into a path that's not good. And I put it all aside and said, okay, well, I'm going to take this route because the goal now is to take care of my son. And I'm super thankful that the Air Force gave me the opportunity to do that. And he's at where he's at now because of that. Do I miss it? No, 100%. But do I know I make an impact? 100% I do.
Yeah. So what was that process of checking your ego? Because I totally understand that can be a driving and determining factor, right? Especially I feel like at the ranks that you're running in, right? And kind of the function that you were operating in, right? Where it would be really easy to be like, yeah, but rather than this is more important, right? How did you differentiate?
For me, it was, I would say more of a sacrifice. like I had to sacrifice the continuation of my operational career for him, which some people would say that's an easy decision. But when you do this for a profession for so long, and you have teammates that you know are in the grind, you know they're deploying, they're going out there, you feel like you left them. You feel like you left them hanging. And that's a super tough one to sit there and like contemplate, like, man, fuck, I'm never going to get to go and replace someone who's been there for, 6 months, hasn't seen his family, probably got, in the gunfight as we speak and all this other stuff. And I'm just going to be here. And then I'm going to go to more of a staff role and kind of like, be at home and kind of just almost have a little bit of regret. And it was a hard thing to balance. Because like I said, no one knows the outcome. The outcome is unknown. You know what I mean? It's like saying that, anyone can be a genius, and that's not necessarily true because you don't know what their capabilities are. You don't know what they've learned or what they can learn. That's all unknown. So it was super scary, but at the same time, I kind of looked at it and I was like, well, this is what's best. And you have to like kind of like your ego's right here, and then the moral and ethical dilemma that you're in here, and which one's going to override which. And in this instance, it was like the health and the future of my own son was more than what this, could overtake. It was honestly, it was a super tough decision, but at the same time, like it was the best decision.
So no regrets.
Zero.
Okay. So I know that when we were at the out there event, and I think you alluded to this a little bit, you had gotten injured, which I think I know the story leading up to it, but the recovery of that, right? I believe it was you had gotten shot in the lung. Recovery was a nightmare and a half.
Yep.
My question, one of the ones that I was thinking of as I was listening was, how did you not give up? It would have been so easy just to recover and live happily thereafter.
Man, it was, because at that point in my life, a couple factors like came into play. One was like, in brutal honesty, revenge. Because at that point, man, I had already slayed it, like just crushed in me anytime I could. And it was, man, they got me, and I wanted revenge. Plain and simple. I wanted to go get back in the fight and be like, no, like I'm not going to just roll over. Because I thought about it too, is like, over and over again, I would think about it. It's like, I could just, in all honesty, I could have just probably just took a medical retirement and got out. But what would that say? Some people would say, man, that's a smart decision. You went out and did your thing. Others would say, did you have the opportunity to get up and get back into it? And why didn't you? And one of my buddies from One's Ready, Trent, they got a saying. It's called regret is hell. And I never wanted to regret, to think like, man, I could have, missed out. I could have regretted turning the other cheek and like walking away. And I just didn't want to regret it. I wanted to prove to myself that this was not going to, after like everything that happened and all this other stuff, like being wounded and staying in the fight and doing what I got to do to get my guys out, because, they relied on me heavily, just like I relied on them. Right. And I didn't want to be a burden. And And that's what, honestly why I just didn't quit. And I felt like if I would have quit and just rolled over, like I would have been a burden. And a burden as in like people would have to carry my weight until I got out and someone had to cover my own deployments and cover my training events and this and that. Like that's just a burden. And I didn't want to be a burden. I wanted to get back in the fight and get back on the horse. And it's just like what other people have told me. It's not how you excel, but it's how you excel when you're at your lowest point. And man, I was at a pretty damn low point some of those days. Like when you can't move your arm and you can't use it, and you know, and you're thinking about how like life's gonna suck and all this other stuff, and everything you train to do, and you know, and I'll be straight. Like we build warfighters here, and we make them strong, and we make them strong for a reason. We try to make them as strong as mentally and physically as possible because we don't know who we're going to run into. You want to have the best opportunity to win or the best chance through like preparation, right? And I just didn't want to set an example that it's okay that if you take a licking, you can just bow out. Nah, because I look back to it too, and it's like, man, when I got shot, I could have just man, I was wrecked pretty bad. I could have just when I started seeing blood come from my mouth and my nose and everything, thinking that, man, I'm probably gonna die now, because I thought I took a shot in the armpit, so which is like no time you'll bleed out and you're gonna die. And I said, you know what? I'm not gonna be a burden. I'm gonna get up and fight. I'm gonna continue on, and I'm just not gonna quit. And that's a model that we have too, is we never quit. And I just didn't have it in me to quit, man. It's just built. It was built throughout like my pipeline and my training, portions of my foundation of how I grew up. Like you just can't quit, you know. I just didn't want to. I just had more in me, so I wanted to go put it out.
When you were at those lowest points, was there a particular thing beyond revenge or beyond just not wanting to quit that you were able to draw on to push forward? Like a thought, do it for your family, doing it for your brothers. Was there anything in particular like this is why I will continue not to be a burden?
Yeah, it was for um I would say it was, man, I didn't want to let my teammates down. I just couldn't live with myself. If I would have, I just wouldn't have been able to live with myself. Um, because in actuality, people would have been like, "It's okay, man. Like you took a, like you pretty much died a couple times and you kept going. It's okay." Like to me, it's not. And the thought process in my head was like, get back in the fight, and I gotta keep going. Like my kids rely on me, my wife at the time, my teammates, and you know, looking back and going, some of my personal friends and teammates died and sacrificed themselves, and I have another opportunity. Why waste it? Like, why waste it and just go sit in a corner and pout? You know what I mean? When I can get up, prove to everyone that thought I was done. Like there's people thought that I was done. And I'm like, nah, I ain't done yet. I'm gonna keep going. And I'm gonna get stronger. I'm gonna fight through this and move forward. So I did. It was just a continuous thought of like never to be seen as a quitter. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's
Okay.
permanent.
Yeah. You don't forget that. That goes back to regret as hell, doesn't it?
Yep. It's permanent.
So, one of my favorite questions to ask folks, because I get some really interesting answers, is of all your experience, good, bad, ugly, fun, crazy, wild, what has been maybe the one thing that you look back on or have learned that you're like, holy shit, I wish I would have known this beforehand?
Oh,
It's kind of a zinger, but it's one
yeah,
that it's
it's
kind of
funny.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. So check this out. Growing up in San Diego, California, right there in National City, we used to go to the beach all the time, right? And I used to go to Imperial Beach near Silver Strand, and they so happen to run buds right near there. And honestly, I didn't even know in the beginning that I would be a combat diver. Didn't know it, right? And I used to see these dudes running up and down Silver Strand carrying, which now I know are Zodiacs. And I used to be in the ocean with my buddies, with my sponge, my bodyboard, just laughing like, look at those idiots, man. Why would you? That's so stupid. Like just those dudes are getting yelled at, you know what I mean, and getting crushed. And we're like, look at that, look at those idiots. You know what I mean? Those guys are stupid. Why would you carry that stupid boat? Just get on the boat and just go in the ocean and paddle, right? And then if I would have known the reasoning behind that, you know what I mean? That essentially like 3 years, 2 years later, I would have been in the same position, just in Herberfield, Florida, off the Sound in Navarre, carrying a damn Zodiac with my teammates, straight suffering in silence while getting our asses handed to us the whole like pre-dive process to prepare for combat dive school. Like if I would have known, I would have been like, I don't know if I want to do that. You know what I mean? Because I thought about it. I'm like, I'm so stupid. I'm such an idiot. Why am I here? You know what I mean? Like, this is so, because those things are heavy, dude. They're not light. You know what I mean? And I think back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I should have been a pilot. Maybe I should have went to college and got a degree, flew a jet, and I wouldn't be carrying this stupid raft around.
That's all. Regret like your life decisions in those moments.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm
oh,
like,
fuck
I should have
this.
went to college and became a pilot, dude. This sucks. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, the suffering in silence with your friends like that is no more greater pleasure. Um, to suffer in silence with them and just get it done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you look back fondly on those like
Yeah,
long after the fact.
yeah,
That's awesome, man. Well, I think, and I want to be respectful of your time, but another one of my favorite questions, and maybe is I guess again, kind of all the things that you've learned and known, what are some of, or what is one thing that you don't get asked often enough that you're like, man, I really would like to share this with someone or get it out there because it's important to me, don't get asked a whole lot, feel like it's worth sharing?
yeah. Um, that's a good question. So one uh, is where people like make assumptions, right? So first, like the first assumption, like let's just say like I got to go to a speaking engagement or whatever the case was in the Air Force, and some people know me, some people don't, whatever the case, and they read this story in the bio and all this other stuff, and then like they make an assumption right off the bat that I'm like this like 6'3" gigantor that was like crushing the enemy with his hands like Conan and stuff like that, and I'm just like this normal 5 foot, like in the morning 5'9", by the end of the day I'm like 5'8", dude that just likes to work out, eat venison hamburgers and steaks and backstraps and drink beer. You know what I mean? Just like this normal dude. But so they make an assumption, right? I wish now, like I tell people, like don't assume, because don't assume anything. Assume that everything is gonna go against your way, and you got to plan for everything. That's one thing. Like assume it's not gonna go your way, like Murphy's Law, right? You plan for one thing, but have three other COAs ready to go. Because number one might not survive contact. Another thing I've learned that I wish I would have told everyone is there's a couple things, especially when it comes to teamwork, like you're working in teams or working with people or working with family or whatever the case, is that in order for the application to be successful, there has to be a couple things in place. Is that first of all, you got to be held accountable to yourself. Like, be accountable to yourself or have someone hold you accountable. For me, super easy. Guys like my friends like Trent Sigmiller, Jared Petrus, Aaron Love, those guys will hold me accountable. Not because they're being jerks. That's just, the nature of their character. Sometimes, can be seemed that way, but actually they're really good guys. But it's like they will hold me accountable because they care, right? So put yourself in a group and a team where, or a spouse or whatever, where someone will hold you accountable. And your actions have to have authenticity. You gotta, like, everyone knows when someone does something and it seems really fake, but they also know when it seems to be very sincere. Make yourself and your actions sincere. Because if you have the accountability from someone, you have the sincerity, brings you closer to the alliance and the alliance of your team to work together. Then the application will be good. Like, the application of what you're trying to achieve will excel. And I wish I would have known that, because there's many parts where nobody held me accountable. Because they were like, oh, that's just Rob. That's just GZ. And he's got an Air Force Cross and he does everything perfect. Like, no, I don't. And they should have told me, it should have been more of my friends and said, or my superiors or whatever the case, and should have held me accountable more. And I wouldn't have made the mistakes that I made. Because then the accountability wasn't there. And then the authenticity, the sincerity of what I did wasn't as prevalent, or maybe half-ass. And then my alliance with them didn't really work out as well. And I wish someone would, like, and then the product didn't come out as good as it could have done. And it's because they held back. Like, if you really give a shit about your partners and your teams and stuff like that, like, man, A, hold them accountable. B, make sure it's authentic. And then, when everyone's on the same page like that, that alliance of everyone doing the same thing together and holding each other accountable puts out a good product. It's almost like the difference between feedback and criticism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Feedback is positive, right? Like, hey man, I really want to give you feedback. Criticism is like, yeah, so with respect,
yeah,
I just want to correct you, right? That's a negative context. If you're constantly in a negative context or whatever the case, this shows the insincerity and stuff like that, the authenticity. Man, give positive feedback. Do the right thing. Help them out. You know what I mean? And then it'll work in its place. I wish someone would have told me that before, because then I would have been able to tell my friends, like, or those individuals, like, are you being for real, or you just kind of like fucking around? Like, man, like, are you holding me accountable, or are you just kind of just going through the waves?
Yeah.
So you can really see and refine what you're doing. Because the better, like I said before, like, the better preparation is the more you prepare yourself and constantly, go after the processes to make that preparation perfect, it'll come out perfect. And I wish I would have known that, especially like at a senior manager level where I'm at now. It's even harder. Like, I got to find that. And luckily, like, I actually work with Trent all the time in our positions, and he holds me accountable, man. Like, and I'm like, fuck, I hate you, Trent, but at the same time, thank you, because he's right in some instances, just like I do to him. Yeah, it's super helpful because it's honest.
I like that. Accountable, authentic, alliance.
Yep, for application.
For application. Okay. I'm gonna remember that. I like that. Part of so I'll be hitting episode 100 in 2 weeks. And I think I'm gonna sit down and actually need to start writing out all of the things that I've learned. And this is part of it. Is the things that I've gleaned, and at some point hope to aspire to apply all of these things that I've learned,
And it's crazy, man. I didn't learn this in I didn't learn that in any kind of like business fashion or anything like that. I learned it through my pastor from church.
Yeah, I could see that. I could really see that. That's funny.
Because he's pretty awesome. So, and I was like,
I'm gonna take that.
Makes sense. Damn it, you know?
That's awesome, dude. Well, I feel like we've blazed over, I imagine, a whole hell of a lot, but I also want to be respectful of your Monday. Is there anything else that you're like, man, I really want to share, or this is important for me to get out tonight?
Um, yeah, man. There's like um a couple things. Um, man, and like we talked about it, life is a journey. You're gonna make mistakes. Just don't make the mistakes over and over again.
Yeah.
Actually learn from the mistake and make forward progress. There's gonna be ups and downs no matter what. It's how you handle those ups, like with humility and pride for the right reason. Um, you know, and share those moments with your teammates or whoever, because nothing's done solitarily. Rarely, especially in the service. Rarely are things done like in solo acts. It always requires support in some sort. And in regards to like other veterans that are out there that are looking at it, that have issues or feel like they're on this solo trip by themselves, like I assure you that you're not. And that's basically like holding a burden. Like if they carry a burden, and that burden is heavy, and you can't carry that burden forever. The only way is within your alliance, those other teammates are authentic and hold you accountable, that they can take a little bit of your burden to give you a break. And I say that in the context of like, man, if you're struggling, like reach out to your friends, reach out to the people. If you have no friends, there's so many avenues out there of people that are willing to listen and hear you out. And that help might be what you need to get you to lighten that burden so you don't have to suffer so much. It could be me. I could pick up the phone. It could be anyone. There's a ton of like options out there to get that help. Please do. They're not alone. Because I mean, like suicide is rampant, and I understand it because I've been at that low point too, numerous times. And it wasn't until I reached out, like I took the step and reached out and took that burden off me to get the help. Those individuals worked with me to hold me accountable. They were authentic about it. And we built our alliance stronger. And the application of what I was doing came out better. And like, I don't want people to feel as if they're alone, and they're not, because they feel they're alone because they feel it's a burden. They don't want to burden their stuff on other people, like their problems. When in fact, there's tons of people. There's regular civilians that feel similar burdens, that have gone through things in their civilian like life that almost are the same, and they'll match. And I want to get that out there to people. Like there's no stigma of weakness or whatever the case. Like if you go and you talk to someone about your problems or issues or things that you've seen or things that trauma that bothers you, that's more pride and ego than anything else. And from someone who has a lot of pride, who's put his ego aside, put my pride aside, and went and sought help, it's like shocking how much better life is. Because under that stress, when you're constantly in that stress and those issues and those burdens you carry, you make bad decisions, man. Because you're only thinking about the immediate release of breath. Like you're carrying this burden, like those strong men, and they carry those heavy boulders. Like that's that burden they're carrying. They're only looking at the immediate, like real quick, like, wait, I can take a knee for a second. When in fact, if they reach out for help, that burden gets broken into pieces and then handed to someone else, and then they can breathe and take a breath for a longer period of time, and then analyze things and then make the right decisions not so much emotional decisions, but logical, good decisions to help themselves, to eventually take that burden off their hands, then turn around and help somebody else that has that burden. But they already know how to solve it. So that burden isn't really a burden. They're helping. And that's really one thing I wanted to get out. Because especially now, man, the global war on terror is pretty much, it's never going to be done, but it's definitely slowed down. And now we're going to reap the effects. We're going to sow what we reap. And we're going to feel those things. And I hope to empower people to understand that, like, man, some of the most ruthless, violent, like, man, valorous men that I know that have been on the battlefield at some of the finest units that the service has to offer, those guys seek help too. We're all human. We're not robots. We're all human. And they do it. That means you can too. There's nothing bad with it. So I just wanted to get that out there, man, because I'm hoping one person that does listen to this makes a call and gets help that needs it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Of the things that I've kind of come to terms with in doing this is being vocal about talking about getting help. Like, I've seen therapists and counselors for 15 years now, and I'm no stranger to, the woes of life, I suppose you could say, or feelings and thoughts and emotions and, the crazy shit that goes on. But that is something that I have learned in doing this and talking to guys like you, is that help is not a far cry away. And if you are authentic about asking for it, like you were saying, the amount of response and uplift you will get is like humbling and mind-blowing. Even from people you don't necessarily know. It's like you tell somebody, dude, I had a fucked up day. It was a really bad day. I'm not doing so hot. Next thing you know, you get a phone call and you're like, I've met you once and you're on the phone with me and it's midnight. Like, what's going on? So like, I echo that sentiment 100%.
Yeah. Especially like finding groups or whatever. Like, man, archery got me into, helped me with that. And I met other individuals that helped me through archery, through hunting. And now I really primarily bow hunt, and I love it. It is the place that makes me part of the happiest, just to sling arrows and I'm not that good at it, but I'll get there. But I meet other individuals that do, and it's super humbling and it's helpful.
Yeah.
Find that niche,
Archery's no joke either. I did it pretty religiously for a year and I never hunted, but I did one of the 3D shoots. Holy shit, that is hard. But yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
No, I appreciate you. Thanks for helping me get that platform to talk. And man, I'm saying hopefully we help somebody, man.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, I'm that's why I started this, honestly, is I felt like I was in a good spot, that I just met a ton of people, had learned to talk. I had time, it was the COVID years and I had a laptop. Actually, it was, but just started recording and slinging episodes out. And now it's like all I've got are just stories and lessons, and there's no shortage of things to learn, man. It's like, it's funny and like daunting, where you're like, which principle am I going to apply today?
Yeah.
So, but anyways, man, I'll leave you to it tonight. We'll have to stay in touch and shoot this shit sometime. I'm trying to figure out where life takes me next. So we'll see.
Hey, we're always hiring.
Yeah, I know. Rob, thanks again for taking the time, man. I appreciate you sitting down, sharing your story with me, and getting some of your life lessons out there. And like you said in the end, for those of you that may need help, please feel free to reach out to anybody. And I think you'll be surprised to know and find out that all of us want to see you happy, healthy, and successful. So with all that being said, please be sure to follow the show, like, rate, and subscribe. And otherwise, we will catch you next time. I hope you all have a wonderful week.